You're with Sean Jung and Where the Veil Grows Thin, an exploration of the sacred moments of our human experience in life and death, joy and sorrow, birth and end of life. It's the unscripted instant when the heart opens, the face-to-face moments with the divine.
Hi, this is Sean Jung. Welcome back to Where the Veil Grows Thin. I'm here today with Ben Leroy again. We're going to have a conversation about courage, presence, vulnerability, what it feels like to be present, fully present in a situation where there could be hardness. Um, and so I'm going to ask Ben to come in and we can start this conversation.
You did a great job introing, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, just sort of specifically, about what your last week was like, because I was thinking of you during that time, but also just thinking about how many times you personally show up for others in very difficult times, and to a much lesser extent, I think I probably do something similar. And one thing that I've really started recognizing in myself is that sometimes I feel a lot of cowardice before having to be present and be vulnerable. And it takes a toll. And ultimately I would like to think that I show up more often than not. But it's got to be a struggle for more than just me, I would guess. And so I'm wondering if there are times when you've agreed to show up somewhere and there's a inner monologue where you aren't so sure that you're going to be able to rise to the occasion.
Wow. I think, speaking of the past week, you and I were going to do this a week ago, yesterday, and something came up in your life, and I couldn't do it the rest of the week because I was gone. I was with a dear friend who was in the process of learning about a potential illness that um, could have been very serious. And she had reached out to me and asked if I could be with her when she met with her medical oncologist for the first time, when she met with her oncology team for the first time, to get the results of all the tests that she'd been through: bone marrow biopsy, PET scan, all this scoping and testing. And of course, I agreed to go. And I think that she asked me because of my history working in the cancer center and being who I am, and working with the navigation team. And when for a while when I worked at the cancer center, which is a team of people that are assigned to patients to help walk them through all the steps of what's going to happen next and to take notes in their meetings and all of that. So that showing up for her was really easy because I love her and I wanted to be there for her. Uh, in the same breath, I can say it was hard because I was afraid of what the message might be. And and it turned out really well for her in many regards. The cancer, there's no treatment there necessary right now. If it starts to grow, there will be. And so the news was so much better than we had anticipated that it could be. And so it was, great. It was very jubilant and joyful in that moment. What happened later was that um, the very typical thing was that uh, there was a lot of anxiety and guilt on her part around worrying, having worried people that cared about her because she had pulled in her village, her tribe, and that we were all there because we cared, but then she felt really bad that we had worried about it. It was just this thing that she needed to go through. That, for me, is where I have to really step up and remind myself not to try to take that away from her, that moment of going down a little bit down that rabbit hole, but to let her have that and then to help her see a different way of looking at it. So, I think we do have a tendency as compassionate human beings to not wanna see anybody suffer in their own vulnerability, their own, stuff that maybe feels bad, like guilt and shame and, I don't know, those things that we have. We tend to wanna try to take that away right away, and I think that that's where I have to remind myself to just be quiet and listen, and and I think I remember saying to her later that night, "Okay, well, gosh, okay, I wish th I wish there was something I could say that could help you see where all of that concern came from, that it comes from caring about you and loving you, and that nobody in that circle of people is feeling mad at you for bringing us in and giving us the information you did have. It's why one reason why when people are, when you're first diagnosed with something in your life, whether it's an illness in your body or an impending disaster in your life, like your partner asks for a divorce or I don't know what, but those things that happen, you don't really want to tell people about it until you have all the information because they're going to ask all these questions. And so when you bring a few close friends in and you don't have all the information, we can all go down that rabbit hole of worst case scenario. And and that's why she only brought in a few people, but she did bring in a few people, and anyway, it turned out well. And I don't even know if I'm answering the question about what that's like to show up for somebody. For me, it's not exhausting. I don't have that. I don't have that sense of what was the word you used just a minute? Cowardice. You said you experience a sense of cowardness or cowardice, and I think that it isn't cowardice so much as it is, like questioning, am I going to be enough? Am I going to be able to show up? Am I going to be the person in my case, will I be the person that she wanted to have show up? In my being there is, am I going to give her what she was asking for? And or am I going to be able to? And I think that, you know, I had a long drive before I could get to where she was, about 4 hours, and in that time, I thought about her a lot. I did a lot of breathing. I listened to music that I liked and just trusted that if I could get to her driveway and before I got out of the car, if I could leave my stuff in the car, if I could just leave all of my uncertainty, all of my questioning, all of my cowardice, and just trust when I walked in and just be open and present. And that's where the vulnerability is, when you're open and present, but just trust that I would be, that I would have what she needed. And if I didn't have it, somebody else would.
You employed the double threshold concept by leaving it in the car. It, I'm both not surprised and also kind of in awe that that the determined nature that you're able to use when approaching it, and it sounds unwavering, and I feel myself in many cases perhaps projecting an unwaveringness, um, but internally there's a lot of wavering going on. And I sometimes feel like I've made it through as long as I've made it through, and I've always been able to keep my balance enough to make it to the shore. Let's just make a bad surfing analogy. But every single time I'm worried about the sharks and falling off the board, and it makes it so I wonder, like, well, why am I doing this? Why am I getting on this board? What are the consequences of failure? How catastrophic is failure? And I wish to be at a place where I have the confidence that you have of just letting go of those things or putting those things aside.
Yeah, I can't say that I don't feel internally sometimes that vibration of fear. Uh, I think, in grief work, when I would work with groups of people, we would talk a lot about surfing. It's funny that you would bring up that surfing analogy because the waves of when you're in the acuity of grief, the waves of pain come, you have to learn to surf. You can body surf, but you gotta get slammed on the beach. But you have to learn to put on a wetsuit and get a snorkel and rise to the top so you can get a breath and know that that wave will land on the shore and that you'll be okay for a while until another one comes. I don't have that sense necessarily of um, needing to do that, but I do have a vibration inside sometimes that is like, "Oh God, oh God, oh God, am I is this the ri am I gonna is this gonna be okay?" And it's always okay. It's always okay because it just never has not been okay enough to stop me from wanting to come and do it again. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe I screw up, maybe I step in it, I've been thrown out of patients' rooms at the hospital before, not a lot, but I have been thrown out, and in the moment, I think it's such a good teacher when we I knew that I took who I was into that particular patient's room, and when she asked me one question and the answer was, "No, I'm not Catholic," she threw me out, which was fine. It's okay. I don't I can get somebody who's Catholic to come in if that's what you want. It's totally fine. I don't have to be everything to everybody. I can't be, and I know I won't be. But if I'm called to be with someone, whether it's my own intuition that says, I need to go ask that person if there's something I can do for them or if they're okay or if they're, whatever, or they have asked me to come. If I'm called to be with them, then that's where I'm supposed to be. And if it crashes, that's what's supposed to happen. Does that does that make sense? I mean, I do trust that. I do trust too that I will be okay. I can put the pieces back together. Maybe I need help. Maybe I need to ask somebody to help me put the pieces back together, like to process what the heck just happened, which is one of the things we did a lot of when I was studying to be certified as a chaplain. We did a lot of that. We'd bring verbatims to the group, and the verbatim was the truth of what occurred at a particular interaction, and then the group would ask questions and sort of brainstorm, at this moment when you said this, what might have happened if you'd said this instead, or we learn to um, do that process. Uh, and it's kind of a parallel process too. When you get into something with somebody and it doesn't go well, doing the parallel process of why was I there? What was I supposed to learn from that? And just I mean, we're okay. Nobody died, although oftentimes people died, but it was if I was there and someone died, that's what was supposed to happen too. And processing that was always really helpful in those groups. But you know what? There's a lot of training that goes into maybe being who I am now. Like I've done a lot of work in terms of being in the field doing the actual work, but I've also done a lot of work around with people who have done lots more work than me, like people that knew a lot more than I did about all of it.
Do you feel like you have an unlimited reserve of inner strength and invincibility?
Pretty much. Pretty much because I have such a strong faith in something we can't touch, something we can't see or touch, that there isn't, there is an unlimited. I mean, until we die, until I die, I feel like there's it. I have hit walls before, and I know when I need to um, shut the door and turn off the phone and crawl under the covers and help Greg, my husband, know you can't offer me up to people right now. I don't have it. I know when I have hit the bottom. I think I've told this before in probably in a Zoom meeting with you. One of my teachers when I was studying chaplaincy, who Abby Kay, who has died, um, it's funny because 3 of the 4 teachers that I had have died. But anyway, Abby Kay used to always say, "You have to feed from the saucer so that your cup is continually overflowing. Feed from the saucer, feed others from the saucer so your cup is always full." And we don't always remember to do that, and I know that there have been times when my cup has been empty, and I know when it is, and I know what to do, and I know not to expose anybody to me because I won't have what they need because I don't have it. But then I get it back.
Okay, but what about when you are in the middle of something and you hit that wall, or does that not happen?
I'm trying to think if it.
Because I think that's, if I drill down far enough, I think that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah,
Is is
being in the
going
middle.
into a situation with some energy in the tank and then being in the situation and there isn't really a way to get out of the situation and saying to yourself, I don't know that I have the fuel to get through this. And then in that very unzen like quality of now you're not being present, but you're thinking outside and you're thinking about the future and you're stressing and you're panicking about what might happen.
Yeah.
Um, that's the thing that I'm worried about, and I think that's the thing that for the non-practiced practitioner,
Mhm.
so the lay person who ends up in a situation where they're doing something that is approximate of what you do, that those are the moments where the doubt creeps in and the am I going to be able to do this? Is this going to take me out? Am I going to not be adequate to keep somebody else from going out? It's all of those stressors. And so that's where, again, I think the notion of cowardice pops up for me. It's like, am I stopping myself from being fully present and helping because I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to make it or provide adequate support because I feel that wall coming?
And so when you think about that happening, what could you do to get through that situation? Like, being able to take a pause, take a breath I mean, just a deep breath will buy you uh, more energy and more presence to be there. But also in that moment of taking that deep breath, what can I do right now? Who can I reach out to help me get through this situation? What can I say right now to help whoever I'm with understand that I need just a moment? Like, give yourself permission. Say, I need a moment. I need a glass of water. I need to think about this for a minute. Can I have a minute to think about it? And in that time, real, trusting that if you're in too deep, maybe you're in too deep. Maybe you don't have the expertise to be a helpful presence, and being able to say that, being able to be honest and say, I think we need to call somebody, and know who to call. I mean, know that, who can we call? Or maybe, if you're with a person, ask that person, who would be most helpful right now? I don't feel like I have the answer for what you need right now. Who else can we bring in? I mean, that's not cowardice or fear. It's honesty, and it's raw, and it's vulnerable. You're vulnerable when you say that, but you're not walking away from the person. You're not abandoning the situation. You're just saying, we need some help here. We need some more help.
Okay, and I
It-
think that when I hear you say that, what that brings up in me is a sense of failing, and that is what perhaps I'm afraid of in those moments is I thought I would be sufficient enough to be able to solve this. So having to go to a plan B and saying I'm not capable and we need to bring in different help feels like failure. And
don't you see how that's not failure? Do you see how being
but my
able to
rational
speak
brain
that?
my rational brain surely sees it's not failure, but in that
No.
moment but in that
Yeah.
moment my rational brain isn't in. It's something. It's the lizard brain kicking in. It's more consequential. It's immediate, and um it's tiptoeing across a high wire and being like, I've made it this far, but like the next gust of wind is gonna knock me off, and now I'm out here totally exposed in this moment, and it's going to be clear for everybody that I have failed. But see, sounds like that's not part of the calculations going on in your brain, and
No.
I'm just I aspire to where you are. I think that I am quite confident that I'm not the only person who finds themselves in that situation where there is whatever the Sean Jung level is. We are desperately searching for purchase, trying to get our hands to that. Um, and so I'm wondering, is that something you ever experienced and you figured out how to not have that problem, or is that just something that is not hardwired into your personality?
I'm trying to think back in my life to times when I have experienced not not being what someone needed. And um and I think that staying with something long enough to, if you can, there was a time in my life when I worked at a crisis intervention center where it was a phone in. It wasn't a walk-in place, but it was a 24-hour phone that number that people could call, and it was on a college campus back in Virginia. And I would take these, I would be there for the overnight or whatever. And I know that there were times when people would call in, and when I hung up, I wasn't sure what they were gonna do, whether they were gonna live through the night, whether I had been able to give them something at the other end of that phone call that was enough, to help them feel. And, you try in those situations to never hang up before you have a sense that that person is going to be okay, that they're going to get what they need, that they are going to get where they need to get. If they need help, that we get help to them, if they need whatever they need. But I know that there were times when I wasn't sure, but as long as I felt like I wasn't distracted by anything else in that moment, that I gave them what I had to give, that it wasn't gonna be on me somehow if they chose to end their life or if they chose to jump off the bridge and whatever. It wasn't my fault. I didn't let them down, but there was that question inside of, you know, and I think that those kinds of experiences teach us how to be prepared the next time we put ourselves in that position to be, on the other end of the phone or the one that shows up as an emergency grief counselor when there's been a sentinel event at the hospital and you walk into a bloodbath in in the emergency room and there's just chaos everywhere and you have been called to come because that's what you do, you show up. And those kinds of experiences teach us so much because we do feel inadequate. I do. I mean, I feel inadequate in those situations. And yet that I know I'm not. I know that I bring something to it. And I guess knowing that, like trusting that in yourself, anybody who is compassionate and wants to be helpful to other people, trusting that when you show up, you bring something to the table that wasn't there before, and it's something good and something helpful and something grounding and some lifeline, some thread of something that somebody can hang on to. I think we don't get to know the outcome sometimes. That's the other hard part. In like, if you're with a friend and you're friends and you're trying to help a friend and you know you're gonna be friends and you're gonna be in touch with these people. But in situations where we are not with somebody that we have a relationship with before that, we don't get to know what happens after. So often, we don't get to know. And that was probably the hardest part for me and still is. If I do a shift at the hospital, which I don't do very much anymore, and there's a situation and we're there and we don't get to know what happens afterwards. Like we leave and I don't know if the person died, I don't know if they were sent home, I don't know if they, if they I don't know. We don't get to know. That's hard for me. I like to know that how things turned out, even if they didn't turn out great. I wanna know what the outcome was, and we don't get to know. It's that attachment to outcome that I have talked about and written about, that if we can not have that, if we cannot have an attachment to outcome, and that's hard because I still have it. I still wanna know, but I don't get to. I don't get to know what happened. So I have to trust that it that whatever happened, that I brought what I had and left it there.
Which is a perfect place to leave it as the end of an episode.
I don't have
Thank you.
any
Thank you.
idea.
Thank you for answering that. And I think that maybe the greatest reminder is really that the notion of attachment to outcome is uh, not always our best friend.
It'll get us. It'll
Yeah.
get us if we, yeah, not having an attachment to outcome is helpful.
Yeah. What are you
And I
writing
don't
about
know
on
if we've
Substack
talked
this
about
week?
what we were, yeah. Well, today a post went out on Substack about the holidays and grief during the holidays, and somebody had said something, and I said I would write about it, and I thought it's not that easy. It's not that short. It's not that cut and dry. But I did post something today as a sort of a let's get started on this conversation, and I might talk about it again next week because next week is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, which is a big family kind of holiday gathering for many families that celebrate holidays. And it can be so sticky. especially right now, because families have been divided it, around our latest election. And so, if you're coming together with family that you think may not be like-minded, how do we navigate that? How do we keep our hearts open to loved ones if we're feeling particularly vulnerable about the outcome of the election? So I may write about that.
Okay, and for people who aren't already subscribed, please feel free to go to Substack and look for Sean Jung, and you can get a weekly, sometimes twice in a week, post from Sean. And the podcast, Where the Veil Grows Thin, is available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're so inclined, please feel free to rate, review, leave a comment. And all other information can be found at seanjung.com. Thank you, Sean.
You're the best, Ben. Thank you.
No, you're the best. Bye.